And for those that are not familiar with the Reimagine Public Safety Pledge, this pledge invites local officials to commit to investing in one or more of three key public safety strategies. The first is around empowering communities to address violence. So as part of this strategy, local officials are committing to standing up and supporting programs, policies, offices, and budgets that enable community partners to actively contribute to reducing violence and promoting neighborhood safety. And today's program is focused on one element of this strategy, community violence intervention programs, and really looking forward to hearing from this group and this panel on that topic. The second strategy of the pledge invites local officials to invest in the creation of off-ramps from the criminal legal system. So it calls on local officials to fund strategies, programs, and services that address the underlying reasons that people or communities have high rates of contact with the criminal legal system. So for example, communities that are making investments in programs that divert people from arrest and incarceration into mental health services, substance misuse treatment, or supportive housing, that would qualify for the pledge as well. And then finally, the pledge calls on local officials to invest in prevention. In other words, investments in community health and well-being that address the root causes of violence and crime to ensure that all Americans have the opportunities that they need to reach their full potential. And so this would include investments in programs that evidence shows improve public safety, things like youth employment, cleaning and greening of communities, as well as programs that promote racial reconciliation between law enforcement and the communities they serve. And these are just some examples of the kinds of investments and programs that pledge participants are engaged in. Certainly, if you're a community that wants to join the pledge, please reach out to us. We'll include information in the chat for you to contact us, and so you can get to the website, and we're happy to talk through the details of the pledge with you all. We also know that this is challenging work, reimagining public safety for mayors, for local government, for community partners, and that's why we're offering this workshop series to really help support the pledge participants. And through this series, we will be bringing you leading experts from around the country to share research, best practices, and lessons learned. The pledge partners are also going to share resource materials that can assist you and your communities in comprehensive public safety planning. So please visit our website. Again, we'll put it in the chat to stay up to date on our upcoming workshop schedule, as well as any additional resources related to the pledge and the various strategies that I just outlined. This pledge is a core program of our Future of Public Safety initiative, which we launched in 2020. We partnered with the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives and hosted a series of conversations about reimagining public safety functions. And more information about that initiative, including recordings of those conversations and the report that came out of it, will also be found at a link that we're going to put in the chat as well. So before I turn the mic over to today's moderator, I just want to thank a couple of partners who've been instrumental in launching this pledge. First, thank you to Adrian Wilson, Beverly Brooks, and the MBK Alliance team, Anthony Smith, of course, and Cities United. You'll hear more from Anthony in a moment. Bree Spencer and Tara Bradford and the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Our own John Jay Office of External Affairs, Mindy Bockstein and Jennifer Lorenzo. A special thank you to the National League of Cities that has been helping us with this pledge as well, Clarence Anthony and Kirby Garrity. And then, of course, I want to thank Rebecca Atkinson, who's the Director of Partnerships and Programs, who works very closely with me on this Future Public Safety initiative and really took the lead in developing today's program. And finally, I want to shout out some friends of ours in the city of Baton Rouge, which is a city that has signed the pledge. We have over 40 people that represent a collective of partners from Baton Rouge with leadership from the mayor's office that are engaged in a 2-day public safety planning workshop. And they are all attending today's workshop as part of that process, and we welcome their participation. So welcome, Baton Rouge. And now I'd like to introduce you to today's moderator and one of our partners in the pledge, Anthony Smith. He is the Executive Director of Cities United, which is a national network that's focused on eliminating violence in American cities. related to African American men and boys, and he's doing incredible work with Cities United around the nation. His bio, his complete bio, is actually in the chat. So in the interest of time, I'm going to turn things over to Anthony because we've got so much important information to share today. Thank you, Anthony. It's great to be here with you and with the rest of the panelists, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Erica. I appreciate that. And again, thank you to John Jay for leading this work, the MBK and the Alliance and the Obama Foundation and the Leadership Conference for all coming together to really move this agenda. Reimagining public safety is not new to the Black and brown communities and poor communities. Folks have been thinking about new ways of public safety for generations. And as you think about the models and the work that you'll hear about today, a lot of this bubbles up from community and community asking for new ways and new thoughts around public safety. It is a great opportunity that we have in this country now to really move that work forward and really move that work forward, not just support from cities, but also at the state and federal level. A lot more folks understand what community violence intervention work is and prevention work is, and understand that it's not in place of law enforcement, it's a support of, and it's a part of the whole public safety ecosystem. So excited to be a part of this conversation and excited to see so many more of our partners and cities really taking the lead on thinking about what public safety really means, and then how not only do they reimagine and redefine, but reinvest their resources to support that work as we move it forward. This work is really about saving lives. This work is really about identifying, engaging, and supporting those who are most at risk of being impacted by community violence and making sure that the folks who do the work have the resources and the support that they need to do that work. So again, excited about this conversation. We got a amazing panel of folks who I get to work with on the regular and be with. And I'm excited that Baton Rouge, as Erica said, is actually pausing their planning session to really be a part of this conversation, because we actually took two of the people who was on the ground with them to have them join us in this conversation as well. So instead of me going through and introducing folks, I'm gonna let them tell you who they are, talk a little bit about how they got into the work, and then why this work matters to them, right? So we're gonna just start with that, kind of get grounded and why folks are engaged in this work, leading this work, and what it means to them as they think about it. I'm gonna start with Sateria. She can talk a little bit about who she is, her organization, and then just answer the question around how did you get into this and what does this work really mean to you? So Sateria, good to have you. Please join us and introduce yourself to the crew.
Hi, Anthony. Thank you so very much. Thank you to the other panelists that are here. Again, my name is Sateria Tate-Alexander. I am the founder of A.G.I.L E Planning Solutions. We are a community-based organization that has been placed in position, I'm sorry, not placed in position, but we stood up for the challenge to lead the public safety strategy here in Baton Rouge. We are graciously here by way of our Mayor, Sharon Weston Broome, who decided to launch Safe, Hopeful, Healthy. And this is a program that I think our community has needed for such a very long time. So I want to pause for a second just to give her that acknowledgement for taking a step to do something this wonderful for our community. What led me here? I'm a native of Baton Rouge, has understood the challenges that our city has faced and the need to also make sure that public safety is not just the responsibility of law enforcement, but also the responsibility of us, our community. So this is such an important thing for us, and we've been able to see so many different great things come from this work. We're going to continue to model this public safety strategy here in Baton Rouge, and I'm just grateful to be here.
No, thank you. And I really do appreciate you being here. And thank you for standing in the gap and standing up and saying we got this and really helping to show the way. I'm gonna turn it over to you, A.G.I.L.E. Can you do the same? Introduce yourself, your organization, and how you got here.
Sure. Thank you, Anthony. And thank you all so much for attending today's conversation. A.G.I.L.E. Sherrills, I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Community-Based Public Safety Collective, The Collective. We're a national training and technical assistance provider. We provide advocacy, education, and support to community violence intervention organizations on the ground, helping them build their both fiscal and programmatic capacity. And we also kind of see ourselves as a vanguard of the movement. I've come to this work after 30 plus years of working in the trenches and on the front line. In the late 80s, early 90s, myself and my brother and a group of friends out of the Watts community organized a peace treaty between the Crips and Bloods in our neighborhood, which shifted the entire quality of life in our neighborhood. We took this movement as a part of our partnership with Hall of Fame football great Jim Brown, rest in peace. We developed an organization called American, produced a 15-chapter self-esteem life skills curriculum, and was a part of a wave of violence reduction across the country, empowering ex-gang members, ex-convicts, ex-drug dealers, credible messengers in the neighborhood to leverage their relationship capital to reduce violence and crime in the community, because it was our responsibility to do so, in these neighborhoods in which we live, right? And so just super excited to be here today, to talk about, some of the experiences that we've had, some of the, huge successes and challenges that we've had in the movement to help to inform the field. And with that, I will turn it back over to our moderator.
Now, thank you for that, A.G.I.L.E. And A.G.I.L.E. and I were just in Indianapolis together yesterday. He's now in Baton Rouge. I'm back home in Louisville. So this work really means we're moving and connecting the dots across the country. One of the things, I don't know if he'll get to, I just want to make sure I highlight it, right? We also partnered to support the White House with the Civic Initiative, and are both now working with 2 other national organizations to run the Coalition to Advance Public Safety. So making sure, to A.G.I.L.E.'s point, that, and also to Sateria's point, that not only are we doing this in one city, but we're modeling what we're learning across the country and making sure that we connect those dots. So I appreciate you, bro. I'm gonna turn it over to David to introduce himself and talk us through how he got to this work and what it looks like for him.
Thanks, Anthony. So David Kennedy, I'm faculty at John Jay College and run what's formerly a center at the college called the National Network for Safe Communities. And we develop and work with largely cities, largely nationally, but increasingly internationally, on what are now recognized as evidence-based approaches to violence prevention. I listened attentively, as I always do, to my friend A.G.I.L.E. And I am obviously in many ways not like A.G.I.L.E. And share with him, I would say, the calling to this work. Well, this is a terrible, terrible area in which to work. The best thing about it is the people who are drawn to it. And I am, again, in many obvious ways, not like A.G.I.L.E. I am a citizen. I am an American. The inequities and the persistent concentration of unconscionable levels of violence in our country are things that are not okay. We should all recognize that. We should recognize that we should do something about it. And I'm honored to be part of the community of practice that has, over these last decades, produced what is now a genuine body of what we can recognize as evidence-based violence prevention. The National Network is set up to advance that work and do everything we can to take it to people who need it and take it to scale.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that, and appreciate your years of being in the trenches and really helping to move cities to a better place. I'm gonna turn it over to Mayor Tim Kelly from Chattanooga to introduce himself, and then also talk a little bit about how you and Chattanooga came into the work.
No, thank you, Anthony. And it's an honor to be with all y'all today. I came to the work obviously through the mayor's office, but prior to that, what you may not know is that I never ran for dog catcher or student council before I became the mayor. I was a business guy, but had spent a lot of time in the foundation world. I was the chairman of our community foundation here in Chattanooga. And at that time, we have some other private foundations here, in addition to the public foundation that is our community foundation. And there was broad awareness, and I became thoroughly convinced that issues of equity and frankly, and economic mobility were the biggest thing facing Chattanooga and the thing preventing us from moving forward as a city. And it compelled me enough to run for mayor. And I'm a bit like the dog that caught the car it was chasing. But because of that, we laid out a very extensive plan called the One Chattanooga Plan, and it very explicitly talks about the things that we need to do to heal this city. And to keep the difficult topics on the table, including racism, including the persistent gaps in public health and in income that plague southern cities, but Chattanooga very, very specifically. And that plan, and I set about right away, and now square in the middle, 2.5 years into it, into tackling those things and putting away the Band-Aids and getting out the scalpel and forceps and really doing the deep work to try to heal this city and make it again a better city on a long horizon, not just slap some Band-Aids on things in the short term.
No, I appreciate that, Mayor, and I appreciate the y'all that came out. Lets us know that you're in Chattanooga in the South. So I appreciate that. I want to come back to David. And David, you started talking about this evidence-based conversation, and there are some key factors about gun violence and how to address it, and have been that have been developed over the last few years, evidence-based that you talked about. Can you talk a little bit about how cities are organizing to do this work and doing that, including both working with and without working with police, right? Because again, some of this work is with police and some of it is not. So can you talk a little bit about how cities are using the evidence-based practices and the models to organize their work with and without police?
I can. Thanks, Anthony. There is a foundational factual insight that's developed over the last couple of decades that has really transformed how we think about and how we can actually practice violence prevention. And lots of people on the front lines knew this all along. Lots of people who have professional contact with violence and violence prevention knew this all along. The academic world had missed it. The political world missed it. And the world that really dominates our discourse on this missed it. Thankfully, that's changing. And that foundational empirical fact is that violence, I'm talking now about what we call community violence these days, homicide and gun violence, is overwhelmingly concentrated in a very small, identifiable world of groups and networks. So the world I'm part of doesn't talk much about gangs anymore. Gangs are a massive distraction from what's really going on out there. But if you start with homicides and non-lethal gun violence in any city and ask a small set of key questions, it turns out that from half to 3/4 or more of all those incidents will demonstrably be connected with a very small world of very active groups in the city. Everybody in those groups will in total be right around typically 0.5% or even less of the city. And they will represent most of the violence as both victims and offenders. This should tell us a couple of things. It should tell us that, as we say, there is no such thing as a dangerous neighborhood. The communities that get labeled as violent are overwhelmingly not violent. And then within them, there's some people at extraordinarily high risk. And the world of violence prevention is mostly seen right now as a variety of models. There's street outreach, there's interruption, there's hospital-based violence prevention. There are initiatives of extremely intense outreach and support like Advanced Peace. There's focused deterrence, which is what I've been part of. If you're close to this work, one knows that what they all have in common is a very deliberate, purposeful, effective engagement with that small world of groups and group dynamics. They all do that. And then they do it in some different ways, but they actually have much, much more in common than not. And with respect to the police, non-police distinction, there are people on this who can weigh in on this themselves, but my experience is that that's a distinction that means a whole lot more to people who talk about violence prevention than it does to people who do violence prevention. And virtually everybody who does effective work has some kind of deliberate relationship with law enforcement. And it can be as minimal as getting information about violence from law enforcement so they can act effectively. It can be much more robust than that. But essentially everything that works and works at scale has some kind of structured, deliberate relationship with the police and law enforcement. And then within that, there are different approaches and different flavors. But the "we don't work with the police" approach is either mostly from folks who do violence prevention on Twitter, or from folks who kind of conceal what they actually do. And in practice, there's almost always something a little bit subtler than that going on.
No, thank you for that, David. I appreciate that. Keela, any remarks to you from that, or thoughts on that question that you want to add to this?
Yeah, and Anthony, the question was just about
really about how our cities organizing themselves around using the evidence-based practice, and then how are they doing that with and without police involved in that organizing?
Yeah, just a couple of things that on that topic. You know, as you said in your opening, brother, although community-based public safety has been around for 30 years, only now in the past, I would say 3 years, and this is a direct result of the Biden administration turbocharging community violence intervention as a complementary strategy to policing, as we're starting to see cities look to integrate community-based public safety in their existing public safety strategy. You know, we're still at the, I would say, in the infancy stage with offices of violence prevention, you know, figuring out how to better work with community-based partners, how to work with municipal government in terms of moving dollars through those systems, but then also how community-based, you know, violence intervention is working with law enforcement, right? I got stories, right? But in most cases, you know, law enforcement is embracing community-based public safety as a strategy. Figuring out how to do it is a different thing, right? In Baton Rouge, you know, we're fortunate that we have a great chief in Murphy Paul, who's led the Baton Rouge Police Department for the past, you know, 5 years. When we stood up the with Sateria, the Baton Rouge Community Street Team, and we needed to access, you know, the dispatch so that the high-risk interventionists can actually respond to shootings and shooting hits in 702 and 805. We had to have, you know, one of our captains, you know, from the shooting team in Newark to talk with the command staff, you know, in Baton Rouge, because cops talk to cops, just like mayors talk to mayors, right? And community-based public safety professionals, we talk to each other. And so I think, you know, Anthony, to your question, there's a lot of movement that's happening, right? And to me, it speaks to like kind of this whole conversation in Baton Rouge today, that we need to have more planning time to integrate, you know, these comprehensive strategies so that we're not duplicating efforts.
No, thank you and David both for that. And it really is around all hands on deck. We all got a role to play, and how do we bring all folks to the table? So I want to move to you, Mayor, to talk about that. Chattanooga is kind of new to the work. And how have you been building out your system and design, and how have you incorporated CVI? What is it looking like for you? So can you just talk a little bit about the One Chattanooga plan and how it came to be, and what's your strategy looking like to include all of these actors that we've been talking about?
Well, yes, sir, I can. And it has been a journey. Of course, I was campaigning, never having campaigned for anything before during the summer of 2020. And seems like a long time ago, but it was not. And after George Floyd's murder and all the events of that summer, I think it was a great teachable moment around policing and public safety. And I knocked on a lot of doors and I listened to a lot of people. And I learned a lot of things about, you know, what I thought needed to happen and some things that didn't need to happen. But, you know, so I came into office were that heavy on my mind, and that within the context of the One Chattanooga plan really helped me inform my approach, and very quickly became part of a cohort, frankly, that carried over from a prior administration that I believe it was Harvard and Bloomberg put together, called Justice, Health, and Democracy. Some of y'all may be familiar with that, and became very much enamored, which this list is still up on my desk, with these 7 principles of justice reform: social connection, freedom from domination, self-determination, participation, economic dignity and security, et cetera. And, and really began to have some deep conversations with my police chief about those sort of things. And he was, I thought, very receptive. But again, departments across the country, are in this state of real transition, and not everybody is on board, or they think that maybe a mayor is trying to be political. I'm not a political person. I'm a very practical person. In any event, he resigned, and frankly caught me very much by surprise. It was all amicable and so on, but then became the process of finding my new chief, and was fortunate to find Celeste Murphy, who is the first African-American female chief the city's ever had. And that was extremely helpful, because we are 100% on the same page. She is very much a police chief, but I'm incredibly fortunate to have somebody who also understands this community side and this community approach. And we began to rebuild our community development. And when I came into office, again, I also established an Office of Community Health, because I'm also quite passionate about mental health and trauma. And I think, without spending too much of y'all's time, I will kind of jump forward a little bit and say we were very fortunate to be part of another cohort around that Bloomberg and Harvard ran around innovation. And the team chose, much to my kind of horror and chagrin, they chose youth gun violence. And I thought, man, I thought they were going to choose, getting the garbage taken out on time or something simple. But it was an incredibly helpful process. And Chris Sands, who's been instrumental to this work in Chattanooga, I believe he's on the call today, was really, really helpful. And, and lo and behold, that work has really led us to launching a mentorship hub, and doing a lot of deeper work with our community centers. We also, of course, in early 22 of last year, had a terrible mass shooting here. Tennessee is awash in guns, which makes the problem that much worse. But as David and others have said, again, it's unconscionable to me that we allow this to go on in our communities. And I came into office determined not to sweep these things under the rug, and to try to break down that concept of otherness that allows people with money and privilege to objectify these problems as something else and not their problem. And so we keep this stuff on the front burner here. It's why I'm on this call with you guys today. And again, we are starting, but I do think it's important. The narrative is important here, that this is not just another, sort of something to be, treated as a tactical problem. This is a deep, deep issue that ultimately extends to the social determinants of health, and will be work that we have to commit to for decades, frankly.
No, appreciate that, man. And taking that deep dive is really, really important. And then also putting your vision and plan out, and allowing folks who are not with that to move on. So shout out to Chief Murphy for joining your team and really helping to move that work. I think it's important. But also this idea of having a strategy and a plan, really thinking about what's our comprehensive long-term approach. So I think the One Chattanooga plan is right on point. Sateria, I want to come to you and talk a little bit around, this ideal of a CVI ecosystem and building that out, and really thinking about how we expand the reach and the access of the folks who are on the ground doing the work. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you guys have been doing in Baton Rouge to create this ecosystem that not only supports the Baton Rouge Community Street Team, but also the wholeness of the work? And then also talk a little bit, I'm sorry, it's going to be a couple of point questions. So I want to give you some space to really process all of this, because you've been doing a lot. And then also, how did you decide who needs to be at the table? And then how did you bring all those folks together, right? So get just to talk a little bit about how you guys have been building this out and what the build out has looked like for you over the last couple of years.
Sure, thank you. Well, I'm going to kind of go back to something that someone said a few minutes ago about the all hands on deck approach. What we know is that community has to be the central focus. So that's who needs to be at the table. And community includes everyone. Oftentimes, like I said earlier, we think about public safety as being a law enforcement centric strategy, but without community, the people who are actually experiencing, the people who are actually impacted, there is no way for us to actually create a strategy that's effective. So all hands on deck is kind of the approach. So making sure that the impacted communities are a part of the strategy, making sure the business community, community-based organizations such as ourselves are at the center, but then identifying what those resources are that are precipitating factors to why we see the gun violence happening the way that we're seeing those happening, and making sure that those resources are at the table. The next thing is politics, right? So politics play a key role. Before this, I would have told you that, yeah, I have no qualm. I don't do politics. I'm apolitical. And I'm still to a degree, but I feel like we have to have politics at the table, because politics, that's who's responsible for the policy. That's who's also responsible for, helping to support the initiatives that are out there. And to Akila's point, law enforcement, we're always talking about, there's this huge gap between law enforcement and community, right? But in order for us to truly build something that is sustainable in our communities, we have to have community and law enforcement at the table. To Akila's point, here in Baton Rouge, we have had the opportunity to work closely with Chief Murphy Paul, who has given us the opportunity to get the dispatch, which allows us to dispatch our team out to homicides. And the importance of that is, honestly, this is sometimes the most critical or the ground zero of what we see happening in our communities. This gives our team the opportunity to connect directly with community and to start the strategy or the healing from that space. In addition to that, Baton Rouge Community Street Team and A.G.I.L.E Planning Solutions also does something called the Public Safety Roundtable. So what the Public Safety Roundtable is, it's a forum that allows our public to join and provide feedback on the state of public safety. What we also do is include our law enforcement. So the captains of each of the districts in our areas come, they give us report outs, they let us know what the trends are looking like. But more importantly, they are also there to receive feedback from the community, because that allows them to also hear directly from the community of what's working, what's not working, what some of the things that the community may feel like should be in focus or not in focus. The other thing is, outside of law enforcement, there are other factors, like we've said a couple of times, that contribute to public safety. So this allows those things to be brought to the table too, so that a full strategy can be created. One of the other things that we're doing here is we are actually in our schools, which is where our approach is a little bit different here. We do something called Safe Passage, where our team actually works with school administration. And we are there to identify some of the peak times of what's considered violent encounters on those school campuses. It may be early in the morning, it may be during lunchtime, it may be after school. Whatever those times are, we make sure that we have a presence in those moments. We also take that as an opportunity to build a good solid relationship with the students. Because as you know, statistics say people between 14 and 30 years old are most likely to experience violence or to participate in that violence. So that gives us the opportunity to start working on some preventative measures that kind of helps to interrupt the cycles of violence that we're seeing happening in our communities. So there are so many wide varieties of things that need to be addressed, but it also takes all of us. There's like, one of the things that I hear all the time is a lot of criticism, of, well, they're not doing that, they're not doing that. In the end of the day, what really matters is what we are doing, how we are figuring out how to fortify the ecosystems that we are putting in place to make sure that our community is getting what they need. One of the things that we see as a response from our community is the consistency. When they see the consistency and they see that they're being heard, then we start to see changes happening. It shifts the narrative, not only the external narratives that we see happening in our community, but also the internal narratives, because it's so easy for us to even buy into what is happening on the outside. So to your point, you asked who should be at the table? Our community first. Okay. And then all of us, everybody else. So I hope I answered the question. If not,
No, you did well. No, I appreciate that. I got a couple of follow-ups and they could be short. How often does the public safety roundtable meet?
Okay, our public safety roundtable is once per month. We're actually hosting our next public safety roundtable next Thursday. And it's always on a Thursday. It's usually the second Thursday of the month, but this month we had a whole lot going on, so we had to postpone it. But we make sure that it is a consistent cadence because that's helpful for our community.
No, thank you for that, because I think that consistency is always a thing that we drive home. If you start a space, keep the space, people will come and people will get what they need. Second thing is around the safe passage. What happens in the summertime with safe passage?
So in the summertime, what we also do during Safe Passage is take on mentees. So we continue to work with those mentees throughout the summer. So these are usually kids that are considered high risk or at risk. And we work with them and their families to make sure that we are helping them to set those SMART goals for themselves that will help them to make different decisions and move in a different direction.
No, thank you for that. Appreciate it. We'll come back to David real quick, David Kennedy, around this idea of models. You and I have talked about models. People call all the time and say which model's best and all of this stuff like that. And, the goal is to have a number of programs and systems working in place together to really move the work. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunities and challenges? No, that's not the question I want for you. The question that really is around, and this is to you and A.G.I.L.E, so I'll start with you. Is really around how have you partnered with other models operating in the cities that you're working in? And how do you navigate those complexities and intricacies when working with existing programs? So what does that look like when GVI or the collective comes to a city? How do you work in partnership with stuff that might already be there or come while you're doing your work that, these complementary models and programs?
You want to kick that off?
Sure, I'll start. Yeah, the collective's approach is about strengthening and enhancing existing infrastructure. So we don't go into any city looking to establish a community-based public safety collective chapter. Again, we're there to strengthen and enhance the existing infrastructure and organizations that are in the city. We're a very collaborative organization, so every city that we're working in, we're collaborating with partners. And to that point, CAPS, the Coalition to Advance Public Safety that Anthony talked about, that Cities United, the Collective, HAVI, the National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform, that we're all working together in 12 cities. In some of these cities that we're working in, some of our community partners are already there, Advanced Peace, I was going to say our folks from Cure Violence, the National Network. We partner with the National Network, on multiple projects. We just finished a big initiative that we did together with the state of New Jersey, in which we supported some 25 community-based CVI organizations across the state of New Jersey, helping them to build capacity and focus in their strategies in cities. The National Network and the Collective, along with the CAPS partners, are all in Baton Rouge, working together. David, and the National Network has been working with our DA here, with Hiller, and A.G.I.L.E and Truce. I mean, for years. right, on their strategy. And so now we have an opportunity to repurpose our strategy. And we're all coming back to the table. We were instrumental in gaining some new federal dollars through the CVI PI initiative. The mayor, Sharon Western Broom, the GOAT, moved some major resources to support bringing in the National Network of Safe Communities to be able to support, truce in their work. Hey, everything that we do is about collaboration. And so we're always trying to figure out, like where are the leverage points? And then also, how do we strengthen and enhance like kind of, our existing programming, right? If a city already has like a strategy set up, we want to, again, we just want to validate it, right? And support it. Yeah.
No, I think that, and I'm coming to you in a minute, David. I think, that collaboration, that enhancing what's already on the ground, building the capacity of what's already working, I think it's part of that sustainability of the work, right? And how do we move it? And I just want to encourage folks who are listening to ask questions in the chat box. We're going to be moving to questions from you all soon. But David, same question.
So what A.G.I.L.E said.
That was a great one.
I think this identification of violence prevention with this bundle of so-called models is a terrible disservice to the field. And I'm going to put words in A.G.I.L.E's mouth a bit, but one of the things I just heard him say is that's not the way we operate. And it's not the way the National Network operates, and I think it's not the way the most effective on the ground practice operates. There is a kind of architecture of effective work at a high enough level, and the way the National Network thinks about this, and it's kind of the way we've come to frame things. It's not the only way, but all effective work in area that's aimed at near-term results. So there's a long-term equity and justice and safety agenda that's really important. But that long-term work is not an immediate response to violence on the ground. So the things that work right now, and they're thankfully now things that really do work right now, I would say all do the following things. They identify that small, incredibly important set of the highest risk groups and networks and individuals. And there are lots of ways of doing that. You can talk to frontline police officers and they know, or somebody can walk into shock trauma and survive a gunshot wound, and that is a very strong indication that they are somebody at high risk. But whether it's working with the police or whether it's hospital-based, both of those frameworks identify those people at high risk. There is community engagement that can make a really, really big difference with those groups and people and dynamics. There are ways of supporting people in their everyday lives and stabilizing them and building new relationships with them that can make a really big difference. There are roles that law enforcement can take, ideally without arresting people and putting hands on them, and sometimes through actual enforcement, that can make a really big difference. And all of those elements individually or together will only work in close, sustained relationship with the people and groups and networks at highest risk. And if you look at everything that we know works, they all have that fundamental characteristic. And then to A.G.I.L.E's point, and Sateria, I heard you say this too, you build that in different ways in different places. And even if your overall logic is the same, when you take that to different places, you build different things depending on local characteristics and strengths and weaknesses and all that sort of stuff. And what really matters, I think, is for the city to understand this, what's the big structure that we need to do here, and to commit to it and to own it and to make sure that it happens and that it's sustained. And the growing emergence of offices of violence prevention at the city level, and having that as a place that owns this and gives it priority and makes sure that it's done and that it's sustained, is a really critical development. Everybody who does this knows that there are all kinds of forces constantly trying to derail and dismantle this kind of work. Unfortunately, when this work fails, it's not because the community doesn't show up. It's not because service providers don't show up. It's because elected and appointed officials can't work together and can't stay focused. And so if the city makes this commitment and it's strong and real and well managed and accountable, then there's all kinds of field practice to learn from. And my view is that getting that right in any particular place and constantly developing what is still not a mature field is way more important than the so-called models.
No, well said, David. And I really do appreciate, elevating the offices of violence prevention and community safety. They got different names. And I think to your point, are new-ish, I opened one up for Mayor Fisher in 2013 that has grown. And and when I started that office, it was like maybe a handful of people I could call and talk to about this work. But now the network has grown. Cities United supports those folks who lead that office, and we got the national office, the national network of Office of Violence Prevention. So there's to your point, this field is growing, and I think you, A.G.I.L.E, and Sateria have all said, you got to nuance it for the city and the place that you're in, but there's key elements of the work that actually moves it forward. So I really appreciate you highlighting that, and you and A.G.I.L.E sharing that. This is a question to all of you, and I'm gonna start with the mayor, and then I'll go to Sateria, David, and we'll end with A.G.I.L.E on this question. This is really around this idea that we need a solid foundation to really create sustainability for long-term CVI ecosystems and initiatives. And David started some of that conversation. Can you all talk about the strategies and approaches that you have used, that you are using to really root and maintain this work inside of the public safety ecosystem, Mayor? So as you think about your work, can you talk about some of the strategies that you're using to kind of root this work in, and then go to Sateria, David, and then A.G.I.L.E?
Well, again, I'll steal a line here and say what David said, because it ultimately it is about leadership. And as Sateria said, I mean, politics is inevitably part of it because policy is important. But and this just, I mean, again, this needs to be something that every community prioritizes when they elect leadership. Because, and frankly, I mean, it's a little bit of a skill from leadership that everybody within administration knows that this is very important to me, that this is not another program that's going to go away at some point, and that, they can pick up the phone and call me if something is not going well. So, the power to convene is the most powerful power that a mayor has. And nobody tells the mayor no, or sometimes they do actually, but it's fairly rare. And for me, I think that is the most important thing, making sure that open communication and collaboration with partners is key. That if it's not, that people are safe coming to me so that I can help correct. And again, I'm a localist. It's not that I'm not naive about national politics, but we have to deal with people on the other side of the political aisle all the time. And the last damn thing that I'm going to do is give them an excuse to not work with me, or to throw up a wall. And so we have an extremely conservative district attorney, for example, and she and my police chief Murphy, and I, we work really well together. And we have to deal with this demagoguing all the time around gangs and so on. And my message to my people is just do not take the bait. Just break it back down into terms that people can understand, into human terms and real terms, and let's do the work. Because it does take all of us to do the work.
Thank you for that. Sateria, how are you all rooting and sustaining the work in Baton Rouge?
So it's going to sound like a broken record, but collaboration and communication, starting with the people that we have in the field actually working within the community. I think it's really important to use credible messengers, people who have lived experiences, people who understand the culture of the community, but it's also important for those people to be able to articulate and communicate with others that are also a part of the community to create real strategy. I think there oftentimes what I've seen in the past is that there's a disconnect between that, but without having that community focus, and without having that true ecosystem in place with the collaboration and communication there, none of this works. So I think those are the two key strategies that helps, because one of the things that someone pointed out earlier is that things change. So what we may have in place today may not necessarily be the most effective thing tomorrow. So being able to constantly have that collaboration and communication in place is going to help us to make sure that what we are doing is still relevant and still impactful in our communities. It's not always about policy, it's not always about popularity, but it is about impact. So we have to make sure that impact is in focus.
No, thank you for that. And your broken record is your third C, consistency, because you're staying consistently on message. So I
Yes.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. Let's go to David. How are you helping cities root this in sustainability so that it doesn't go away? How are cities doing that?
I was asked this question about elected and appointed officials not doing their jobs with respect to this, and what my favorite prescription was in another forum, and I found myself saying that I'm currently enthused about the guillotine. That's fortunately not a real solution. I will circle back to Mayor Kelly and again say what he said. We're convened here around the mayor's pledge, and I think that's exactly right. Mayors are my favorite politicians. They operate at a high enough level so that policy and discourse and such really matter, and they operate as effective executives at scale and in a very meaningful way. And mayors can make transformational differences in their cities around the issues that they care about. And the awful fact is that lots of mayors care more about garbage collection and snow removal than they do about violence, and that is unacceptable. Thankfully, it's changing, and the body of applied work that we've been talking about gives them something to work with. One of the reasons mayors haven't cared about this traditionally is because they didn't have the tools to be effective. That's not true anymore. And since it's not true anymore, the most important thing is to build this into cities in the same way that you build snow removal and garbage collection, right? It's work that needs to be done. And as I said a moment ago, this is not a mature field. It's developing constantly, but it is real. And since that's true, mayors really need to own this.
No, thank you. 100% agree. Keelan, how are we rooting this work so that it's sustainable and long term?
Yes, sir. And I'll be a broken record on this as well, that sustainable, community safety strategies have to be rooted in community. You can't have public safety without the public. I know we live in a country where, you say public safety and people say police. And the reality is that police are only one aspect of the public safety ecosystem. If you're not incentivizing Pookie, Raheem, and Sabrina and them, those folks who are most vulnerable of being victims and perpetrators of violence in community, and training them in conflict resolution, mediation, de-escalation strategies through a trauma-informed lens, understanding that violence is a public health issue, right? And that you're training a whole new cadre of public health professionals, right? Because The public health model says that those who are closest in proximity to the disease of violence have to be equipped with the skills, the tools, the resources to do the intervention, the prevention, and the treatment, right? And so if we're going to anchor a community-based public safety strategy, and you know, and law enforcement is an intimate partner, right? There's a really high threshold for arrest and prosecution, and we know that that arrest and prosecution doesn't solve problems. Even when Pookie or Raheem or Sabrina goes to prison, in jail, and they might spend 10 years, when they come home, they can still hold a grudge. And so again, you have to have credible messengers who are highly trained. And this has to be funded, not just with ARPA dollars or with foundation resources, right? That incubate innovation. This has to be publicly funded through the general fund in the city. You know, community-based public safety is effectively a function of public safety in any city. And you know, we have to grow it, as David said, that even though we've been around for 30 years, we're still in our infancy stage, you know, as a movement, and we're growing. And so I would say that this work has to be anchored in community-based organizations with support from electeds, because we know that there is a consistent turnover in terms of elected officials. This work has to live in the neighborhood. It's not an either or, it's a both and strategy, right? That both community and electeds have to own, and law enforcement have to own safety as a strategy collectively. And I will leave it there.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think that's a great way to close out. So I thank you for closing us out with that. We are actually at time. So I want to thank the panelists. Thank you, Mayor Kelly. Thank you, David. Thank you, A.G.I.L.E. And thank you, Sateria. I don't know how, but Sateria, I've said your name about 100 times today and it just slipped that time. I appreciate all of you all for your wisdom, and also want to give John Jay, if you want to know more about the pledge, please have your mayor, your city folks go to John Jay's website, look for the Reimagine pledge, public safety pledge. Shout out to our friends over at the Obama Foundation with MBK Alliance, our folks at the National, the Center Leadership, and all of you all for joining us today. So thank you all for being a part of the conversation. So we appreciate you all and look forward to seeing you on the next couple of workshops when they come up. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.